I gotta wait. How long I gotta wait for a press record?
Go.
Welcome to the share, where Miss Dreme always has a story.
I'm Dreme, a black woman with many beautiful interconnecting identities. A few I will name at this moment as we get started on this podcast journey together. A Bostonian, born and raised in the inner city, Dorchester and Roxbury neighborhoods, to a teenage single mother who has my whole heart. An educator, I've been working with youth and children since my teenage years, and formally, I have been teaching almost a decade now. That's wild to think about. An entrepreneur, I am the founder of The Chair, a black and brown centered tech platform dedicated to supporting people on their hair journey, where you can design hairboards, connect to hairstylists, and share hair care tips for a more joyous experience. I have a workable site, my prototype. It took me 2 years to build, and now I'm on this adventure that you're currently on with me. My goal for this podcast is to share stories, black stories, educator stories, entrepreneurship stories, and hair stories. I want you to leave each episode with the opportunity to gain new insight, just a glimpse into my world or the worlds that are featured on my podcasts, a little chuckle during your day or night, possibly a little anger to encourage you to advocate for justice, and hope to continue learning and dreaming. So come in and listen to the beautiful voices in the chair as they share their stories, starting with me.
Where we share stories in the chair.
Hello, beautiful people. This is Michael. Michael, can you please introduce yourself?
I am Michael Ventresca. I am a grade 5 teacher. I teach English language arts and social studies at a public school here in the Boston area.
Mm-hmm. And Mikey V and I met in high school. And
Yes, we did.
And I was trying to think back to the first memory, and I couldn't remember what we talked about, but I remember us sitting together in the cafeteria, and I heard your accent, and I was like, I know that accent, right? Like, and
You were like, oh, gross. No.
And I just remember,
No, I'm just kidding.
yeah, I just thought about like my mother's generation, and they would talk about like their relationship with people from Southie, and it was never necessarily positive.
Nope.
Yeah, but right, but me and you, when we sat together, like we weren't thinking about the past, right? We were thinking about our experience at BB&N, which was a different experience for the both of us.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, I think I remember. I think it was freshman year, so I think a lot of us were just so. I mean, at least me. I'll speak for myself. I was just so focused on getting to know people, because I was there before, but there was like that influx of like 40 or 50 kids, and then they sent us up to, the woods. I remember we were sitting down and talking, and you told me, you're like, I was talking about how I was from Southie, and you were like, yeah, my mother, she's like, Dreme, there's a lot of crazy white people that live in South Boston. And I was like, she's not wrong. So, but I actually distinctly remember having that conversation. But I just remember like thinking that you were like one of the, not one of the few, but definitely one of the most authentic people I met, especially that first year in high school. And I think we became pretty good friends in the context of school during those couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. And, since then, you follow people on Facebook, and we like talk to people through people and always checking in. And anytime Mike and I are in the same space, it's always a great conversation. So when I learned that you were an educator, I was like, ooh, like, how's that world going for you? Was education always the goal for you?
It wasn't always. It was when I was in. I think you remember the senior project at the end of our senior year, BB&N.
Yep.
Where basically, just for your listeners, they gave us like kind of a couple months at the end of the year to kind of do our own thing and kind of pursue these independent projects based on our interests or whatever. And Mallory, our friend Mallory, did this as well with me. My grandmother was a volunteer at a local elementary school in South Boston, where I grew up. She basically pulled students who were in first grade students who were having trouble reading for extra help in the hallway, right? She had her whole little like carton with all these different flashcards and these different words and word parts. And the homeroom teacher she worked with would identify students that needed extra help with their, phonological awareness and stuff. And she would pull them out in the hallway. And me and Mallory supported her with that for part of our senior project. And that's kind of where I really got into, I just became really passionate about seeing and helping kids learn, and seeing, a kid grasp something that they hadn't understood before. And then her passion for that was infectious. And then she developed, such a great relationship with these students. And there was definitely peaks and valleys in my interest in education, dependent upon, the situation that I was in or the school, the culture of the schools I was in. But that's what made me want to go into education. And one of the university I went to had a master's degree in education that was supposedly, one of the better ones. Although I think a lot of those programs can tend to be scams because of how much money, obviously the amount of money you have to pay, and we think that's a whole other thing. But it did play a factor into which university I decided to go to and what I decided to do when I was studying there. So yeah, I would say high school.
And when you're like doing the senior project and you're really falling in love with education, when you get to college, specifically looking at the education major, do you remember like a course or a professor that really solidified it for you that this was the route you were going to go?
Yeah. There was, I think my freshman year, I had a professor. So we had to take a bunch of prerequisites to get into the master's program. And so I started just right off the bat, and it was like the history of urban education or something like that. It was a long time ago, obviously. I just know that the professor, he was super passionate about it. He had his anecdotes were awesome, like applying what we were learning about in the textbook. And he'd be like, this is a conversation I had with an administrator about this, or with a student about this, or with a family about this. And again, it's another part, like when you meet someone in education who is really passionate about it and is in it for the right reasons, and it's not in it for, who really is just generally just passionate about the betterment of students and their learning and their, trying to give kids like choice-filled futures. Like those people are, I think, really, really infectious to be around. There's a lot of people in education who are not like that, and they can kind of poison the well a little bit. When you do meet people like that, and I've been lucky to have a lot of amazing mentors when I was, in my master's program. My mentor teacher was incredible. When I worked at a charter school in Lynn, I had an amazing mentor. And then my co-teacher now, like I would consider a mentor as well. Like I think I've been really, really lucky because I've crossed paths with all these amazing people. And I think there's a lot of people who get into education that don't have that luck. It can kind of turn them away from the profession.
How has your identity showed up in the classroom? Like you've chosen to work in public education while you attended a private high school. Like you could have went the independent school route. Why go the public school route? And you're choosing to work with mixed populations, urban populations as a white man. Why choose that direction?
So my first teaching gig after school was not in that direction. So I went abroad and taught at a private school in South America. So that was not in that direction. That I kind of did just because I kind of was using teaching as a vehicle to, go travel and stuff like that. I knew I still had a passion for teaching. I love the country, but it was a private school, and it was parents and students that were kind of at the top of the socioeconomic ladder in the context of the city that I was teaching in. And let's just say I didn't see eye to eye. There was a lot of views that a lot of these parents had that I didn't necessarily agree with. I guess one of the things that really drew me in education was precisely like the lack of, equity there is within the education system, from a socioeconomic lens, through a racial lens, through all these different lenses. And the people who were my mentors, the people who like I said, those amazing adults that I came across, were very passionate about like trying to close, achievement gaps and trying to fix the system in the little ways that they could, or affect change in the little ways that they could. Their passion for that is one of the things that like got passed on to me. I met, the co-teacher that I would be teaching with. And I don't know, I just fell in love with the neighborhood I'm teaching in, the people who I'm working with, and the students that I have the privilege of getting to see every day. I guess that was a long way around. I wasn't necessarily like I was specifically going to I wanted to teach in this neighborhood with a mixed population. It was just kind of a fortuitous route that kind of led there.
Where we share stories in the chair.
Look, it's my commercial. We will be right back.
It's more than just a bad hair day. It's a journey. Finding the right hairstyle isn't easy, nor is finding the right stylist or the right products. Looking in every corner of the web gets messy, overwhelming, and exhausting. All the ads, the articles, the products, the videos, it shouldn't be this hard, but it is. And now, it isn't. The Chair. A black and brown centered platform where you can design hairboards, connect to hairstylists, and share hair care tips for a new joyful path on your hair journey. Avoid the clutter, save yourself hours, months, and even years of research and poor trial and error. Everything you need and only what you need is in one place. Hairboards made by people like you, for you. Find the right products, the right people, the right answers for you, stress-free. Join the Chair community and make every day a great hair day. When you share your pain, you allow others to help you. And when you share your success, you help others get theirs. Lean on the Chair. We got you. No stress, no strife. In the chair, the chair, the chair. All right.
When you think about your identity and you think about your whiteness, how does that show up in the classroom?
I try to understand that the lens through which I view my identity and view the world is different than a lot of the kids who I serve. And so I try to, mitigate the negative effects of that by just trying to connect as closely as I can with every single individual student at a personal level. As the way that my whiteness manifests itself in the classroom, I'm not really sure. I think that maybe the people who see me teach or some of the kids that I are in the classroom might see the way it manifests itself more than I notice how it manifests itself. I definitely share my interests and personality with students. I'm very into food, so we watch these food travel shows or basketball or things like that. That's a tough question for me to answer. I'm not sure how it does. I think it definitely does.
When you think about your lesson plans and when you have the opportunity to push and pull some of the curriculum,
yes,
how do you go about thinking about bringing your kids' worlds into the classroom through the curriculum and your world into the curriculum?
That's an awesome question. And I think that now I'm starting to think about the answer to your previous question. Okay.
Okay.
This is why you're an amazing interviewer. So I definitely have failed at this multiple times, but I try to make sure that the authors and the stories that we read together in the classroom are reflective of experiences shared by some of the students that I have in the classroom. Now, I think the way my whiteness can manifest itself is also my ability to engage and talk about some of those themes in the right way or in the best way. So for an example, right, if we're reading a poem about Black girl hair, and this is something that I just have almost no cultural or personal knowledge to draw upon, I will read these authors and I will read experiences of people who have dealt with themes that I have not had to deal with before. But I still feel uncomfortable in a way talking about some themes that might be more prevalent in the lives of some students with color. I know it's important for me to still talk about these themes and talk about it in a way that's productive and respectful, and making sure that I'm engaging all students and making sure that they're seeing themselves in the text and in the authors and and what we're reading and writing and what we're learning. But I think maybe it's evident for some of the students that the way in which I talk about some of these themes, maybe they can see like the unease in the way I'm talking about it because of like it's just something I don't have as much experience with or have as much experience talking about, which is again something I probably need to work on as an educator.
Mm-hmm.
But that would, I think, be a way in which my whiteness would manifest itself in the classroom. Not only my whiteness, but my being a male as well. But per your other question, I'm always, if we're doing like a poetry unit or we're doing like a realistic fiction unit, every text I select there's a lot of thought behind it. A lot of that comes from, I try to use a cultural responsive lens so that, again, kids are being exposed to a wide variety of authors, whether it's based on identity, whether it's based on the time period, whether it's based on the gender, the type of story that's being told, the genre of the story that's being told. For example, a lot of kids in my class are the children of immigrants. There's a lot of like really, really rich texts that deal with that experience. And then also we'll always learn about the author of every single text that we're reading about. So this is the author. This is where they're from. This is their life story. And then a lot of the discourse we have in the class has to do with how the author's lens or how the author's experience can be seen throughout the themes in the text. First of all, from a literary lens, if you can understand those type of themes, then that's a deep level of comprehension. So you're working those muscles as well, but it's also allowing students to identify with, we call it windows and mirrors, like identifying with or learning about people who are either similar or different to them based on how they identify themselves. I'm not very good at giving concise answers, but that's I try to be more concise when I'm teaching fifth graders. I try to be a lot more concise than this. But
no, I appreciate you working through your thoughts with me. Like, I think that's important. So thinking about this windows and mirrors, I've never heard it put that way, and I like that. When did you notice you were white?
The earliest memory I have is of me understanding that I was white was I was really, really little. Do you remember when Pedro Martinez was a pitcher for the Red Sox?
Yeah.
Do you know who that is?
Yep.
Right. So I wanted to be Pedro for Halloween when I was like it must have been the late 90s. And I wanted to paint my skin darker because I knew Pedro had darker skin than me. And my parents were like, nope, you're not doing that. And I'm like, why not? Like, I just want to look like Pedro. And they're like, you can't do that. And I think in not so many words, they explained to me that, as someone who's white skinned, you can't paint yourself like a dark skinned person because that's offensive. I don't think they went into the whole, history of like blackface with me and stuff like that at that age. And that was definitely the first time that I can remember where I started like thinking about, so like I'm white, right? Like there's a kind of a clear distinction. There's a difference between me and Pedro Martinez. Because I think when I was trying to dress like Pedro, I was like, he's darker skinned than I was. I didn't view it as like this binary thing that I think we all kind of become the more we get socialized in American culture. We see race in a much different way. But that was something that I remembered when I was little. And my parents probably should have taught me more about that, because I think a lot of like white parents from a certain generation, they try to not be racist by just not talking about race. I definitely started to think about myself or realizing that I was white then. And then as I went to school in later years, I went to a charter school where we were kids from all over Boston, and it was very stark, the racial differences between kids from certain neighborhoods, right? So there were kids from Southie, there were kids from Dorchester, there were kids from Mattapan, there were kids from East Boston, there was kids from all over. I think when I was there, I already knew I was white, but that's something I definitely started thinking about more because it was, Boston still such a segregated city.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was very kind of right in your face, like how kids from certain areas tended to look certain ways, or these kids tended to be from this background and these kids tend to be from this background. And a lot of kids kind of hung out with other kids from where they were from, and kids talked about it. Like everyone talked about it. Oh, these kids from here are this, these kids from here are that. So it definitely developed later.
The the chair.
Oh, and if you're interested to learn more about my experiences as a Black woman and educator in Guangzhou, China, I wrote my first ebook titled Nowhere and Everywhere, Captured Emotions of a Beautifully Broken Love Story. It is on lulu.com. Take a read and see some beautiful photography of mine. Enjoy the rest of the show.
The chair.
I'm going to keep saying this because I really like this windows and mirrors. You are a fluent Spanish speaker.
Yes.
And
well,
you okay?
fluent enough, I guess. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like you lived in South America for a while. You've been taking Spanish since I've known you in high school. You know, we started at the same level, but I am not fluent.
Mhm.
But the fact that you lived in Spanish-speaking countries, do you feel like that helped you look into a window of other cultures and really be able to learn from a different point of view because you were immersed in the language and in the culture all at once?
Yeah, absolutely. I think language is a window into a culture because a lot of languages, it's not just words that are different. It's the way in which you communicate with people is completely different. You know, the mannerisms are different. The expressions are different. The colloquialisms are different. The way in which the intonation and the way people talk to each other with certain, emotions are different. And so in order to learn a language, you also have to understand kind of culturally where people are coming from. Yeah, I think that's definitely out, especially when it comes to interacting with a lot of Hispanic students that I've had over the past and their families. If there's a family that doesn't speak English but does speak Spanish, they're not used to having as many teachers that can speak Spanish, right? So it enables me to kind of connect with them on a more personal level. And it enables them to advocate more freely for their children. I think in order to truly become fluent in a language, you have to kind of immerse yourself, culturally. And that doesn't necessarily, like I met people in Colombia who were fluent in English, who had never been to the United States or an English-speaking country. Their English was much better than my Spanish was. But one of the ways in which they would learn the language is through American media or British media and like Netflix shows and interviews and YouTube. So even though they weren't necessarily like interacting with people in an English-speaking country all the time, they were very culturally fluent in English as well as, like grammatically fluent. So yeah, that definitely has enabled me to have a window into other people's culture, but also it also helps me more easily find mirrors too, because there's a lot of mirrors in different cultures. But if you don't have the language or the ability to communicate, some of those mirrors don't get seen because language is kind of a barrier.
What would be a mirror that you've learned from, an example of a mirror that you've learned from other cultures?
Yeah, absolutely. So like sense of humor is an example. Me and my wife were in Mexico for like a fair amount of time while she was still waiting for her green card. And at that point, I was pretty good at Spanish. And I really realized that the sense of humor in a lot of the areas in Mexico where we were is almost identical to kind of like the Boston sense of humor in the way that it's like very sarcastic. It's very dry. There's kind of like a dark sense of humor to it, right? But that's just a kind of a surface level. If I didn't have those linguistic skills, like I wouldn't have been able to understand that at all. Right? In terms of the way people interact with their family, the way that McNea's family does family dinner, for example, is like very similar to the way that my family does family dinner, and the way that they have like everybody kind of in the kitchen at the same time, and everybody has their own idea of how to make this type of thing. Some aunt will like be like, no, this is how you're supposed to do it, and then Nia's mom will be like, no, well, this is how I do it, and this is how and my family, we're very similar. Like it's like the way we interact to the point where me and my cousin got in a huge fight over which cheese we were going to put on this dish that we were making. It was very passionate, right? So, and like that's something that without being that fully immersed, which I think are some of the most beautiful things, are like that, those kind of like intimate moments with family and friends and stuff like that. And this is just from my limited experience. From what I've seen, is I found that like some of the big barriers, like language, can kind of cover up a lot of the things that make most of us similar in a lot of ways.
So, as an educator, what piece of advice do you have for a brand new educator who is entering into this field and they've decided this is what they want to do? What piece of advice would you have for them?
So you have to be willing to accept feedback. You have to come into it with an open mind, and you have to come into it with the idea that what's comfortable for you might not be the best way to serve the students and the families that you're charged with serving. You want to try to find someone who is experienced and clearly is good at their job, whether it's teaching or administration or whatever, and someone who's passionate about it to kind of learn from. You don't have to, like, they don't have to be specifically your mentor or whatever, but you want to be a sponge, because there's a lot of really good people who have spent years and years and years at this practice. You have to be humble. You have to understand that you're going to struggle. You're not going to know everything right away. The things that make you comfortable are not necessarily going to be the right things for students, and you just got to be open to that. It's, I think, one of the best professions in the way that it's a very engaging profession. You're constantly speaking. You're speaking with students, you're speaking with families, you're speaking with coworkers. There's a lot of social interaction. You're spending a lot of time with other human beings. And so it's, in that way, for someone like me, I love being in those situations. I love making connections with people. But again, you got to be open to hearing that, what you're doing is not the best way to be doing it. And then you have to work on adapting and trying to accept that feedback and consistently trying to improve your practice, whether that's the way in which you're managing your classroom. Maybe someone says, hey, I noticed that the way you hold boy students accountable for their actions as opposed to the way you interact with girl students makes it seem that you're giving more space for creativity or for them to express their identity. Right? Your immediate reaction might be to be defensive and be like, I'm not doing that. But, you have to understand that, like, your lens is kind of clouded because you're not really able to kind of take a step back and look at your practice from a third person perspective. So those things are always valuable. Or whether it's the way that you're teaching a certain lesson, or the way that you're introducing certain texts, or the way that you are running small groups, or the way that what exercise you have them doing students when they come into the day, or how you're addressing a student when they're clearly upset about something. There's a lot of different hats you got to wear as a teacher, and no one's going to be good at them at all, no matter how prepared you feel you are. And the best thing to do is just to be, like I said, open and ready to receive feedback and have a humility in your practice, is what I would say.
Well, thank you so much, Mike, for sitting in the
Thank
chair.
you, Dreme.
You're welcome, for sitting in the chair and sharing your experiences. I truly appreciate it.
This is the first time I've ever been interviewed by anybody, so I apologize for my long meandering responses. I was trying to be thoughtful, but then I would sometimes lose track as to what I was saying. So this was definitely a great experience for me.
Welcome to the chair, where Miss Dreme always has a story.
Thank you for listening to an episode of The Chair. I, of course, would love your continued support. Let me know what you think of this episode by doing all the things. Subscribe, comment, and come back next week, every week. Enjoy the rest of your beautiful day, or if you are like me, enjoy that moonlight and that one star under all your city lights. Love you. Talk to you later.
The chair.
How long I gotta wait for a person to record?
Go.
We support her. Shit.
Do your...
Welcome to the chair, where Miss Dreme always has a story. Where we share